It's more, how can we find a way for you to be able to do these things and it just feel effortless, a part of who you are, without the feeling that you're having to fight against every inch of the current.
That's where I think you and I differ, is that if I have somebody coming in saying, hey, I want to grind better and I want to be more successful in business, I'm going to be like, okay, cool. What's the rest of your life look like? Right? Because you're coming in for this thing of like, I want to be better in business. Great. That's how you're perceiving the problems that you want, and that's the outcome you want. Fair enough. I want to see what the rest of your life is looking like, because that's going to tell me how narrow a path you're on.
Okay, I am really excited to share with you an episode that is a very different spin to any of the episodes that we've had before. Today, I get to interview Ryan Christensen, who is the high-performance hypnotherapist. This is the first time that I think I've ever had quite a contradiction with any kind of hypnotherapist or guest on the show, but in the most wonderful way. You can tell that Ryan and I are very, very passionate about our stances, and even though we have differences of opinions, it was wonderful to be able to debate and play with these different theories so beautifully together. Ryan was such a pleasure to speak to. He's someone who's clearly very knowledgeable in his craft and is generally a very fascinating person with a fascinating background. I won't give away too much, but imagine someone who was a spy that then turned into a hypnotist. That's kind of what you get with Ryan. Ryan has a wonderful, interesting take on the idea of how high performers can elevate their performance, their general day-to-day lives, thoughts, actions, and well-beings with hypnosis. And more importantly, he goes into the specifics of how he uses his own form of hypnosis to be able to go into the minds of high performers and literally rewrite different subconscious stories so that they can live the life that they want. I wouldn't say that this episode is just for hypnotists or hypnotherapists, even though, of course, you would get so much from it. Anyone who wants to really understand, almost in the most left-brained way, how hypnosis can really impact your life. Ryan has such an elegant way of being able to explain how the mind works, almost like this ultimate computer. I've heard so many different metaphors for the way that the brain works in the past, and Ryan gave such a refreshing insight as to why the brain can do what it does, why it purposefully chooses to do what it does, but more importantly, what we can do to change that. So without further ado, I cannot wait to bring on Ryan Christensen. Lovely. So Ryan, thank you ever so much for coming on. How are you doing today?
Doing quite well, Scott. Thank you for having me on. This is great.
No, my pleasure. So, Ryan, you are the high-performance hypnotherapist, and I thought maybe we could start by just outlining what that is, what it involves, who you help, and then we can maybe start to explore afterwards as to how you got there.
Certainly. So I look at hypnosis really as a way to integrate and align all levels of your mind. And so when I'm talking about high-performance hypnosis, especially when I'm working with entrepreneurs and folks like that, it's really about making sure that every level of your mind is on the same page, working together as a team in the same direction for the same purpose, right? And often where we're coming into this work is different parts of our mind have different agendas. They got different priorities. They're working against each other. You've got this friction that you've got going on. You're fighting yourself all the step of the way, right? You're procrastinating on this, or you're like doing 70,000 different projects and you're not making progress on any of them. Or you're seeing a lot of progress and a lot of success and business is going well, but you're not having that internal sense of self-worth that should come with that much success, right? So the internal and the external are not matching up the way they should. So it's a matter of figuring out, it's like, okay, where are things not lining up the way they should? Why are things not lining up the way they should? How do we get everybody on the same team so that now you're an integrated whole working together as one? Because once that happens, it becomes that well-oiled machine, now all the friction goes away, right? And you're actually able to operate at like max capacity and like your maximum performance and your maximum potential, because you're no longer having to fight yourself every step of the way.
Yeah. No, very, very nice description. And how on earth did you get started in this? Because it sounds like you've had quite the journey.
Yeah, it has been a ride, I'll tell you that. So I actually got into this in 2019. I was doing a lot of work on myself. I had gone through a second divorce in 2018, and dating in the Washington, D.C. market is horrible. So it was not going well for me at all. So, I did what every guy does whenever you're facing dating challenges in life. You hop on the internet, start finding groups to teach you how to do that. So I got into a couple of different men's groups, was doing work on myself. And in one of these groups, there's a gentleman by the name of Ryan Fowler, who was a hypnotist and doing some presentations on like toxic shame and emotional baggage and using hypnosis to clear that out. I'm like, well, raised Catholic, got some of that. So did a session with him, and it was amazing just like how much weight got taken off your shoulders. It's like you're walking around with 50 pounds in your backpack, you take 20, 30 pounds out, like everything is just easier to do. Like, well, that's really interesting. And I was in a point in my career where I'd been working intelligence for about 22 years at that point. Marine Corps, then the Air National Guard. I was working counterterrorism for a while, working counterproliferation, but they weren't letting me do the fun stuff anymore. I was doing more like project management and like relationship management stuff. So it wasn't really the fun and interesting stuff. I was looking for that next big thing to do. And I actually thought about becoming a psychologist, but that was going to take like 6 years and $500,000 to get my PhD. And like, that was unappealing.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's like, well, because number one, I have to do the same stuff I was doing for another 6 years, which I really wasn't happy with, what really wasn't enthused about. I wasn't really able to get started helping people and working with clients and really making a difference until I was close to 50. I was like, well, that's just like way the heck out there. But I had this powerful experience with hypnosis. I'm like, well, I wonder what this is like. So I went and got certified in hypnosis in January and February of 2020, which is perfect timing because all of a sudden I had a lot of heads on my head very soon thereafter. Yeah. A lot of time on my hands. So I started working with some guys and seeing some results. Realized I needed some additional tools because the standard like neo-Ericksonian suggestion-based stuff was not working the way I really wanted it to. So I did some work, trained with Marissa Peer, trained with Mark Cunningham, did some other training online with Scott Jansen doing conversational hypnosis, and kind of through that journey over the past 3 years or so, I've kind of put together my own methodology, my own philosophy on how to approach hypnosis and how to approach change.
Okay, very nice. So what I heard there, Ryan, was I was a spy and now I'm a hypnotist that is probably also a spy using hypnosis.
Well, what I found with hypnosis, to me, hypnosis is a very simple thing. It's just a set of tools that give us more direct access to the unconscious mind. That's really it in a very simplest way. And the magic is, okay, what do you do now you're there? And what I found is like every hypnotist and every school of hypnosis and every philosophy of hypnosis kind of approaches that differently, right? Depending upon how you see the world and how your specific talent set is. Well, I also have Asperger's syndrome. So I've always kind of seen people as kind of like a black box that you kind of have to analyze. You got stuff going in, you got stuff on the other side. You got to figure out what's going on inside. So it's a very systems and patterns based kind of way to navigate the world. And then I spent 23 years doing intelligence, which is all about figuring out how stuff works and what people are doing on the other side of the world that they don't want you to know about, right? So I take this approach and I start looking at people's behavior and I say, okay, well, this behavior is driven by a purpose. Like everything you're doing has a reason, right? And it's driven by these beliefs, it's driven by these values that we've had forever. Okay. Well, those stories are in the unconscious mind. The beliefs are in the unconscious mind. All the behavior is being driven by the unconscious mind. So instead of having to look at a black box, I can just open the door and says, okay, how's that thing wired? Yeah. Right? I've got access to the unconscious mind. It's like, why not just ask questions? Show me what you're doing. Show me how this makes sense. Like you're doing it on purpose. You're trying to help yourself. You're trying to get to a specific result. Okay, cool. Show me what that looks like. Show me what that means. Show me how this came to be. Tell me the story of why I'm not good enough is a belief that you have. Tell me the story of why I don't deserve love is a belief that you have. And so just like make them walk me through this. Like, okay, great. I still got 23 years of intelligence. I'm really good at asking the right questions to figure out what's going on. And once you know the story, once you see that pattern, once you see how the machine is built, now you know what you need to adjust to make it work different. And since you've already got access to the unconscious mind there, that's a much easier process. You don't have to fight your way through all that conscious stuff. You don't have to beat down the wall of the critical factor and all that, just the normal rejection you get. You can do all that adjustment that you need to while you're in the trance. Yeah. So you can cover massive amounts of ground and cover really, really big change really, really fast through that kind of approach. But that's my approach. Some other people do much more story-based stuff, right? You can look at hypnosis being like generative and creating new and interesting possibilities, or restorative, fixing the stuff that's broken. I'm really good at the restorative stuff, really good at figuring out what's broken and fixing it. The generative stuff of like, yes, you're awesome, go conquer the world. Like, that's not my forte. Like, that's much more your space where you're talking about, the beliefs around money and the beliefs around power and the beliefs around success and like giving them that power up So because that's you're much better at telling the stories and saying, here's this pathway, here's how to walk that path. I'm like, I can fix the broken stuff, but you need to go do the other stuff yourself. Right. So I've found that there's, everybody's got their own talents and approach to hypnosis. And depending upon which stage in the journey you're in, you're going to need different tools. You're going to need a different process.
Yeah, very interesting. And you said before we started that you think that, and I said there's definitely some overlaps with what we do and there's going to be some differences. I think you said that you think there's some differences in the philosophy. So I'd love to start just getting into the weeds and unpacking some of that.
Sure. So one of the podcasts that I watched, you were talking about superconscious programming, or reprogramming, I should say, and you were talking about how this idea that we as an individual, we have like the answers to our own problems. That's very much in line with kind of like what Scott Jansen does with his conversational hypnosis, where it's really like we'll get you in a trance state where you now have the ability to like integrate all these lessons you've learned, right? Like we on some level kind of have all the answers to our own problems, right?
I do a slight adjustment there. I say you're 95% there. It's more that the idea of being enough, being capable, to not have those things are things that you had to learn. And so this is simply unlearning those things as opposed to you have an innate wisdom. So it's more about taking someone out of the trance that they were put into, that the mind already knows how to be enough, how to be capable, how to belong, because it was already born with that, as opposed to and then maybe it's just the phrasing of everything you have is within you. It feels a little bit more woo-woo than I would personally like. So that's the slight nuance. But other than that, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I think that there's a lot of really powerful stuff there. For one thing, I disagree that we innately have this idea that we're enough, that we're good enough, and so forth and so on. I don't actually think that that's a base state for us. I don't actually think that's the case. And the reason why is because, at least for people who have that belief that they're not good enough, that's something that they created on their own, that they derive from their environment. And that happened very young in the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right?
Yes.
But the idea that we kind of come in tabula rasa, sure, but that doesn't last more than just a couple of years at most, when you're very, very young, right? And so once you start developing actual beliefs around 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, that process is starting, and you've already had some impacts to you, typically, that say you can't get this thing, or you're not good enough, or there's stuff that's unavailable. So I think that by the time the mind is creating these beliefs on a subconscious level, we're already had those impacts that, you're not necessarily enough. There's conditionality to things.
Oh, okay. I actually think we're in complete agreement on all of that.
Perfect.
Yeah. No, I'd say we're. Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. I just think that they were still born with the inherent understanding that they were good enough. They just had to learn along the lines, whether it was 6 months, a year, 3 years in, that might not be the case. And then that ended up becoming the leading program. But it might not be the base program. It was just, is it the leading program? Is it the most powerful program right now? 100%. But is it the base code? No, I don't think so, which is why I believe that it's always possible to go back to the original default.
And I guess where you and I disagree is like, I don't think there is a default base code.
Interesting.
Right. I think that by the time you hit 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, that's when the unconscious mind begins building these beliefs. You don't really have the capacity before then to actually like do that. You don't have the mental capacity, the developmental capacity to process the world in such a way as to create these beliefs on a subconscious level. You're right. If I kind of look at the mind as having like 4 distinct layers or 4 distinct levels. Like you've got the instinctive mind, which is kind of that lizard brain, that's part that's like ducking fastballs at 90 miles an hour driving you to the grocery store, right?
Yes.
And then you've got your emotional mind, right, which kind of evolves on top of that. And then you've got your rational logical mind, and you've got consciousness that kind of lays on top of that. And the way I look at it is that each of these layers of your mind has evolved to solve like different classes or different kinds of problems, different complexity of problems, like look at the world with like different levels of resolution. So if you look at child development, it's like child psychology and stuff like that, they go through very distinct stages where up until a certain point, they can't even comprehend that other people are distinct objects, right? That there's a level of egocentrism up until like 3, 4, 5 years old, right? object permanence isn't even a thing until you're like 6, 7, 8, 9 months old, right? Right. So my kind of theory, my working theory is like up until about 2 years old, you're just like running in purely instinctive mode. And then that emotional mind, that subconscious mind really starts kicking in, developing, and starts making sense of the world on that level. And then that rationality and everything else comes in. And that's where that critical factor kicks in.
Yes. Okay.
That layer between the conscious and the unconscious, right?
Right. So your belief is that the base code doesn't even start being, it's not created until around about 3 or 4. And then through experiences, that's where the base code starts being interesting.
Yeah.
Very
Says I don't think that you're even able to really comprehend the world in such a way to. I have this idea that you're not good enough until you have a certain sophistication of mind.
Oh, so my pushback to that, and by the way, I completely understand.
Please do. Yeah.
I'd almost be tempted to agree with you, other than the fact that, and by the way, I live for this, so
right,
already I'm loving this conversation. Yeah,
it's great.
Is that you're right? Like a baby won't even know it's its hands from a pen. It won't think there's anything other than that. But even in that inherent understanding, if you are all there is, then how can you not be good enough? How can you not be everything? How can you not be one with everything?
I don't think that you can comprehend the lack of it. Because only once you hit that differentiation point do you start being able to understand, presence and lack and stuff like that. So I don't think that there is, until you evolve a sense of self distinct from everything else, which means you have to understand that there's an everything else that is distinct from you.
Yes.
Right. That's at the point where you can start saying, okay, am I enough? Am I not enough? Right. But that's just my theory. Right. And the other thing I would say is, to some degree, it doesn't matter if the base code is there or not. Because fundamentally what you have to do is you have to say, okay, how did you get to I'm not good enough? Like, how did that thing come across? And to me, the difference between, I think, the way I'd approach things and the way I see a lot of other people would say is like, okay, you just have to tell them that they're good enough. It's like, well, no, this thing came into existence for a reason. Like there is a chain of events, there's a chain of logic that caused them to draw this conclusion about themselves and about the world around them. And until you prove that thing wrong, it's still in there. So what happens is, for a lot of people, they'll say, okay, well, you got to do affirmations to tell yourself how good you are. Okay, well, there's 2 problems with that. Number one, the only reason you have to say that is if you don't believe it. If you don't believe it, it's really hard to convince yourself of something you don't believe, right? Number 2, essentially what you do is you say, okay, let's drop that in straight into the unconscious using hypnosis. I'm good enough, right? Now you have 2 sets of beliefs. The belief that you're good enough, the belief that you're not good enough. And your mind is going to say, okay, fine. I now have these 2 conflicting beliefs. Which one of these is correct? And this one has a lot more evidence weight, structure behind it. So eventually, like, okay, yeah, but sure, there's 2 possibilities, but this is the right possibility. This is the right way to move through the world, right? And so I don't see the more suggestion-based and affirmation-based ones as effective until you actually do the work to dismantle the framework and the foundation that supports this belief that you're not good enough.
Okay. Interesting.
Going down and figuring out what that foundation is, what that support network is, and what that framework is critical to be able to dismantle it and take it apart. So this doesn't have any support anymore. So that when you drop in, I'm good enough, and you support that, this has support and structure and foundation, and this does not.
Okay.
What happens?
Give an example to that.
Sure.
Yeah, of dismantling that. Utterly fascinating, by the way.
Yeah. Like, I've got a very different kind of way of going about things. Like, you don't have many, hypnotists that have Asperger's trying, like, with intelligence experience doing this sort of stuff. Like, I think I'm one. So, for example, if you're going through life and like you're growing up in a, let's say that you grew up in a relatively poor neighborhood. Okay. So your family's poor compared to everyone around you. All right. Well, now you're moving through a world where you just can't get what you need. Right. And no matter how hard you try, no matter what you do, it just doesn't seem to work. So it's easy to say, okay, well, the problem is me because I keep on trying all these things and nothing works. So the problem is me. There must be something deficient in me. And especially since, again, children up until a certain stage, especially when that like ego development and the subconscious mind is like developing itself in the world, that critical period between like 2, 5, 6, 7 years old, you don't have the sophistication to understand it's not you, because you're egotism. It's all about you, right? So it's not the environment, it's you. So getting there and say, okay, yeah, I understand that you're trying all this stuff and nothing working. So it's very easy to assume that it's you. But if you're in the middle of the desert and you want a glass of water, that just ain't happening, right? It's just not flat out not available to you. Yeah. So it doesn't have anything to do with you. The things you needed, the things you wanted just were not available. There wasn't anything you could do because it's an environmental issue, not a you issue. And because of that, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you or you're not good enough or you don't deserve. You are not in a place where that thing was available to you, which is fine, because now you are. And now you can have that thing. And then you can be good enough and you can be deserving and so forth and so on.
Okay.
So transforming that, yeah.
And this is doing this on a subconscious level so that people can be guided to that realization that, hey, you did the best with what you had.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's the lesson, that actually this inherent not good enoughness,
right.
That wasn't my fault. I literally, with what very Goodwill Hunting-esque, it's not your fault, Will, kind of thing.
In some ways, yes, but it's much more basic than that. It's that you just didn't understand what was happening. Yeah. You assumed that it meant that there was something wrong with you. You just didn't understand that it was an environmental issue that you couldn't win anyway, no matter how hard you tried. The game was rigged. Yeah. If the game is rigged, losing is the expected outcome. So losing doesn't mean you suck. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. That's what's going to happen when the game is rigged. Yes. All right. And so once you can like walk them through that, that fundamentally changes what that entire period of that life means about who they are. Which means you can then say, yeah, this is just a period of life where you didn't have the things available to you. Now that you're grown and you have the different capabilities, you're in a different environment. You can create an environment of plenty and abundance for yourself. Everything you want is yours.
Okay. And is that the only realization that someone needs to have in that moment for the not good enoughness, or are there multiple realizations that person would have to go through? Because it feels like that might be one strategy out of the dark of not being good enough to be able to go,
correct.
Well, actually, yeah, the game was rigged against me. What else could you do as a 2-year-old?
Right, exactly.
I could barely say words, let alone get out of this horrible home life that I was in, right?
Exactly.
But I'm assuming that there's other realizations or other paths that they can be guided on to get out of that.
Well, I've had a lot of business mentors say, oh, you need to do a course. You need to do a course. And I'm like, well, I don't think that would actually work. And the reason why is because everybody's story is very individual. There's themes that you can see around like, oh, the environment didn't have what you had available, so there's just rigged, right? Or mom and dad were working all the time, so they weren't around to give the love and affection that you needed, right? Or you're going to school and you've already got this idea that there's something wrong with you, so you kind of hide who you are. Because if there's something wrong with you, you can't let people see you. So of course it's difficult to connect. Of course it's difficult to make friends. Of course it's difficult to date and so forth and so on, right? And so you'll see these different themes, but everybody's story and the way they got there, the foundation and the framework that they've built to sustain or that are underlying these beliefs is going to be very unique, which is why, at least to me, you've kind of got to do that individual exploration. It's not enough to simply say, okay, you were growing up in an environment where things weren't available to you. Because maybe it was that. Plus, maybe there's some emotional abuse or physical abuse where it's like, okay, yeah, but I also couldn't protect myself. And that means I'm weak and I can't get what I need and I can't protect what I have. Right. And you don't know that until you get down there and you start doing that exploration of, okay, how did you as an individual draw these conclusions? Right.
Okay. That makes sense. And I know that you predominantly specialize in working with men. Have you worked with any female clients doing this as well?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, again, I got my start in hypnosis and doing all this work when I was doing work in the men's communities, like for fixing myself, working on dating and so forth and so on. So while I was participating in those communities, I just started working with men in those communities that had these different issues because it was a very natural fit. As I've matured in my practice and so forth, as long as I've been doing this for like 3.5, almost 4 years now, like my focus on myself has changed and I'm not really part of those communities anymore. So I've moved much more into the entrepreneur space. So I've worked with several entrepreneurs. I've worked with several women in that space as well. And the modalities, the modality itself, the system itself works regardless of gender. I tend to be more direct, right? So there's a certain like female personality that is going to respond better to that. They tend to be a bit more hard charging, a bit more entrepreneurial, a bit more success focused and achievement focused than typical women, right? Or other women, I should say. Other women would need a much more nurturing sort of approach, right? I'm not that guy. I'm a very masculine guy. I've got Asperger's. I'm not that dude. I need to find somebody else. Even if they use, it's like, I'm not the guy for that. Like, I wish I could be like the universal solution, but I'm just not. That's just not how it works. So is it gender neutral? Yes, it is a gender neutral approach. Could other people use the same kind of framework and modality to do better work with different populations? Probably so. Again, it's a hypnotist is kind of like a therapeutic relationship, in that you have to have the relationship, you have to have the rapport, got to be able to communicate well in that regard, But the framework itself, this idea of getting down there and figuring out what is the foundation and the structure beneath these beliefs, and like dismantling that before you create the new structure, that works pretty much across every situation that I found.
It makes sense. Something I hadn't factored in, which now that you've described it, absolutely makes sense that with your approach, the women who do work with you, naturally, they're going to have higher masculine tendencies, right? So that makes sense that you could pretty much be identical in the approach and it would still get the same results, because the tendencies, whether it's low agreeableness or that extra hard charging.
And I think it's much more just the ability and the capacity to handle much more direct like feedback and process, right? Like a lot of people focus on the feeling and the emotion and dealing with that as that's the goal, is to like not feel this emotion anymore or get rid of this emotional baggage and deal with this emotional trauma. And I don't care about any of that. Because to me, the emotion itself isn't important. The emotion is just a signal from your unconscious mind about, hey, I'm viewing this situation this way. I need you to respond in this way. But that emotion itself, that signal, is the output of the interpretation of the world through that framework of beliefs. So if we get down to the belief itself and that framework and how that machine is made, so that this input equals this emotion on the output, then if we can fix that so that this event in your life no longer means pain and agony and shame and guilt and everything else, then we don't have to deal with that emotion itself. That fixes itself. It's like the emotion is the check engine light going on in your car. And if the idea is, okay, I want the check engine light go off, well, you can remove the fuse and that fixes the problem. If the check engine light is a problem, right? Or you put duct tape over it, right? Yes. But the whole point of the reason check engine light is on is because you're supposed to check your engine. There's something going on down there that's broken that you need to fix. And as soon as you fix that thing underneath, then the check engine light goes off. So you solve the emotional problem by dealing with the underlying issue, whether that's some sort of broken belief system or a problem that's been unresolved in some way or whatever that might be. You've got to actually go down and follow the emotion down to the belief beneath it, sort that out, and then everything above it takes care of itself.
And how, I was going to say, how do you do that? What I really mean by that question though, Ryan, is that I know that especially online nowadays, when it comes to the education that's out there for men, especially
Sure.
younger men, there's a really strong push towards that Stoic philosophy idea. And I think what many people can hear is, don't listen to your emotions. And
Yes.
and I know that it's much more nuanced than that. That actually it's more about whatever that emotion is, it's coming up for a reason, but it doesn't mean that it's a good or valid one. It doesn't actually mean that the reason you think that emotion is coming up is why it's actually coming up as well. The mind has all sorts of wonderful hierarchies to basically say, yeah, this is the reason you're doing this, and actually it could be something completely different. So how do you go down and find what the true belief and emotion is? Because half the time when someone consciously believes they're doing something because of X, it's very rarely because of X, even if they've done lots of self-work on it. So how do you go down and find the accurate belief or the accurate emotion / memory that needs to be dealt with?
Sure. So This is a great question because there's actually like 17 different pieces to this, which is beautiful. I love this. All right. One of the best parts is that this idea of you shouldn't listen to your emotions, and they're like, the emotions are wrong and they're coming up for the wrong reason, right? If you're looking at the mind as those different layers, right? The instinctive mind, the emotional mind, rational logical mind, consciousness, right? Each of those layers is looking at the world in different resolutions and using different tools to analyze the world, right? So if you got the same set of data and using two different sets of tools to analyze it, you're going to come up with different answers. All right. There's a great little study I read. I think it's Stanford or something like that. There's something called the Stroop test or the Stroop effect. Okay. And basically one part of your mind exists to understand language and symbols, and there's another part of your mind that understands colors. All right. So I said, okay, great. So we're going to put these words on screen, and the words are going to be a certain color. And I want you to press the button that corresponds to the color, right? So if the word is like bumblebee and the color is red, then you're supposed to push the red button, right? Yeah. But the word is white and the color is green. Now you got a problem, because the symbol part of your mind says the correct answer is white. The color part of your brain says the correct answer is green. And they're both right. So then there's a third part of your brain that has to step in and figure out which one of these two correct answers is most useful for answering the question of the moment. So there's this measurable delay that you see with that. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is they did this test where they took people and they like hypnotized half of them. They didn't hypnotize the other half. And for the people that they hypnotized, they said, okay, in a couple of days, we're going to give you this test. And there's going to be a bunch of meaningless symbols on screen that are a particular color. Just press the button that corresponds to the color. So the people that weren't hypnotized, they had this measurable delay because they had to resolve that conflict. The people who were hypnotized, there was no delay because those weren't words. The symbol part of your mind didn't matter. There was only one right answer, right? So what this means is that the intellectual, rational, logical part of your mind and your emotional mind are using different tools to analyze the world, colors and symbols, right? So it's not that your emotion is wrong. That's the correct output from that system, given how it's built and given the tools it's using to analyze the world. So you can't say that emotion's wrong. It's correct. You may not understand how it's correct. That's a completely different story, right? And I think that's where a lot of the problem comes in, because we say, oh, I'm feeling this, but I shouldn't feel this because logically it doesn't make sense, or it's not appropriate to the situation, or whatever that happens to be. And the difficulty there is now you're setting up a conflict between your brain, because you're saying, I don't want to listen to this signal. I don't care what this is. This is wrong. Like, no, this is right. This is right. And this is right. You're feeling this correctly, and it's inappropriate. You're feeling this incorrect. You're feeling this, and you don't want to, right? And that conflict is, I think, at the core of what a lot of the issues people have, because you're setting up this hierarchy where the unconscious mind is by default incorrect and the rational mind or the consciousness is correct, right? If you look at those layers, if you look at the mind more as, say, a company, okay, you look at those four layers, like your instinctive mind, that's your worker bees, right? That's your accountants and your dock workers and so forth and so on. You could look at your emotional mind as their bosses and the supervisors. Your conscious or your rational mind would be like the upper management type, and then consciousness would be the CEO. Well, if you're in that situation, essentially what you're saying is upper management always right, and the workers are always wrong. Well, that's going to cause massive problems in the company, right? And that, I think, is a good. That's why people have so much friction and have such a hard time working, because I've set up this war in this hierarchy where I'm right and you're wrong. That's never a good working relationship. Now, if you're running a company, you could just fire the workers that don't agree, get different workers. Can't do that with your mind. That's not how that works. So you're stuck, right? Which is why I look at it much more as an integration process of saying, okay, sitting down, okay, rational mind, you might not be correct in this situation. So there's a certain amount of humility you have to come to this work with, of saying, hey, I might be wrong about why. All the stories I think of why things are can be completely freaking wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And you have to be willing to let those go in order to understand the truth of what's happening down there. And once you're able to do that and understand this truth, now you can actually negotiate the solution between those two, right? You're feeling this emotion for a reason, because you feel like, it's like you feel, the belief is I'm not good enough, therefore you feel inadequate, even though you know You shouldn't feel inadequate. Welcome to imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
Have all the evidence in the world that you're amazing and still feel like crap, right? Well, you feel like crap because the belief is I'm not good enough, right? And this is kind of like one of the other pieces, one of the beautiful pieces about hypnosis is it teaches us that the unconscious mind judges true and false, not based on objective reality, but based on, does this match what I already believe? Right? Yeah. If it matches what I believe, it's true. If it's not, if it doesn't match what I believe, it's false by definition. So if the belief is I'm not good enough, success does not match I'm not good enough. So of course it gets ignored.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so you come to this beautiful place where it's like, okay, this thing's working on a completely different set of principles and a completely different set of tools. So you have to give it its due and just like say, for the purpose of this exercise, I'm going to assume this thing is right. Show me how you're right. Help me understand how you're right. So the process to get down to that is to get somebody in hypnosis and you start asking questions like, all right, okay, you're not letting yourself succeed. You're getting in the way, self-sabotaging, so forth and so on. Okay, great. You're doing this to help yourself. Doing this for a reason, trying to help yourself. Show me how this makes sense. Yeah. Show me how you got here. Show me how this is the correct way to go about things. And let your mind come up with different examples in life, like, hey, there's a situation and this is why. And here's this situation, this is why. Here's this situation, this is why. And the thing is, by pulling up, this is something I've learned from Marissa Peer, her
I was going to say, that sounds very RTT.
That's exactly right. I got certified in RTT. I saw that's like, that is one of the most beautiful data gathering pieces I've ever seen in my life. Right? Intelligence analysts.
I was going to say, as an Asperger's person from intelligence, being able to get a part of the brain to present the data, of course that's that's a wet dream.
Oh, 100%. It's cheating. It's complete cheating. I love it so well. Like, hey, give me the answer to the question. It's like, give me the answer to this puzzle. Show me the solution to the puzzle, right? And just like letting your mind show you the story in its own way, because it's never, because your emotional mind is looking at things with low resolution. Think about this. Your instinctive, your emotional minds are designed to respond to the world as quickly as humanly possible. It's like the best pattern, most powerful pattern matching machine on the planet. Yeah. Well, to do that quickly and effectively, it has to look at what's the same, not what's different. Right? Yeah. So it doesn't care about the nuance of the individual situations the way we do on a conscious level. Conscious mind is really, really concerned with detail and difference and nuance. And a conscious mind doesn't have time for that. Right? So no individual situation in your life really matters more than the other. There's just a great big box in your head, the label on it says, I'm not good enough. That's got about 1 million different memories on it. So what that means is that, what this means is two very interesting things. Number one, your mind can choose any of those different examples, which means you don't have to go back and see traumatic stuff in order to get the story. It's completely unnecessary. As long as we get clear examples that tell the story of why I'm not good enough as a label on that box, that's sufficient. The other thing is, if all these things mean the same thing, why not just take the label off the box and put a different label on it? Yeah. Now you don't have to do the trauma whack-a-mole thing of dealing with individual events and, oh, this time it happened when I was 7. Oh, this boy told me this thing when I was 12. And like, oh my God, this girl rejected me when I was 11. And like, doesn't matter. All these the same things, slap a new label on it, move the hell on.
Okay. So here might be a slight difference. So what I do is a bit more hands-off than that. Mm-hmm. And here's the only reason why, because it makes it, even there, that's quite a hands-on.
Yes.
You've got a librarian pulling out, finding the right data file and giving it to something in your mind and going, there you go. Yeah. All I do with the superconscious and the superconscious, it's you could be using God, death, or sex. It's a very loaded word.
Right.
What I mean is just this innate intelligence. You could just call it the subconscious. I don't really know what it is at this point. I'm not sure I care.
Yeah. At this point, it doesn't matter.
You've got it.
If it works, it works.
Yeah. It is. I will ask it to safely find all the memories, but also all the beliefs, all the parts. For me, it's just like safely find every aspect and now go treat it. And what I find is that sometimes people will get flashes of memories, but 99 times out of 100, they don't. Just because it feels like going through a big cabinet one at a time can still feel quite time consuming compared to this intelligence that knows all the memories that you consciously know need to be treated, know, as well as all the ones that you don't know need to be treated. So it sounds like we're doing something quite similar there, although I feel like yours is a bit more hands-on.
So there's a couple different pieces here. Number one, I'm not treating individual memories as we're going to change this event, this event, this event. I'm saying, give me examples of what's in the box.
So right there, why do you need the examples?
Because the examples give you the data and they tell the story of how you got to, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough because this happened and it meant this and I felt this and I felt this way about myself. And then this happened and it means this and I felt this way about myself and I felt this way about the situation. And by getting it to show me different examples, you get to see that story from different angles at different points in time and over the different points of their development. So you get to see how that story and how that foundation and structure got constructed over time and how it's consistent over time and how it looks from different angles, right? And if the entire point of trying to figure out how that foundation and structure is built isn't to understand how it's built, it's to figure out where are the gaps that can stick a crowbar in and rip this thing apart.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what I did, and to be fair, what I've been doing, I've been doing this coming up to 9 years now. I've only started doing this in the last 2. Because what I would do is something a little bit similar. There'd be aspects of like parts therapy. There'd be an RTT element of, hey, let's go back to memory. There'd be all this, but because they're wonderful. What I found started to make a really and I'm sure you've seen it. It's, even though it's not magic, sometimes the things that you see are the closest thing to real magic you'd ever get.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's like we get to do this as a job. Like it's mental.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
It's awesome. It's awesome.
I started to go so hands off, and the more hands off I went, the bigger the results. So what I would do is I would say, hey, safely go find all the memories related to I'm not good enough, and then I would say, go treat it in the safest, fastest, most effective way for all of Ryan to recognize that he is enough. And then that thing would go, I wouldn't need to be the one. Exactly. I wouldn't need to jam the crowbar in though. That thing would be able to do it all for me. So it's almost like I'd sent in like an AI bit of software that was able to go find it for me. And I was able to just go, drink my coffee and just watch the AI get to work.
Right.
And I found that I didn't personally need to go in and jam the get the crowbar in and find the gaps for the person. Their subconscious could do that all for me.
So I think that I love that approach. It's very similar to what Scott Jansen does of, let me get you in a state where you can solve your own problem. Right. Yeah. And that's very much that idea of like giving the mind a space and an ability or a methodology to go in and do all the work it already know needs to be done. Right.
Yeah.
And I love that. The difficulty I have with that approach is that it assumes that the client actually has the capacity to solve their problem, that they've got the solution. Yeah. And I don't know that that's actually true, because going from I'm not good enough to I'm good enough may be enough for that person to get what they want in life. It may not be. Right. And until you actually figure out what all the beliefs are that are down there, you don't know if they have the capacity to change that to something that is going to be effective. Yeah. Right. Because one of the biggest things is I got really big on free will this year. Free will became this really powerful concept that I got deeply, deeply interested in this year. And what I was sort of looking at is, if people are moving through the world and they're operating from a place of fear, of pain, or need to prove themselves, then that's really all they can do. They can have to run from their fear, they have to avoid their pains, and they got to prove themselves. And that's really the only option. They don't really have free will. And the problem is, if you get one of these like really high performing guys, what do? They want to be able to perform more. Right? So if they feel proving themselves is what they're supposed to be doing in life, and you get them in the superconscious state and say, okay, solve your performance problems, what are they doing? They're teaching themselves and figuring out how to run faster. Yeah. Right? And make the treadmill smoother and better, be able to run faster on the treadmill, rather than I don't have to run on the treadmill. I don't have to prove myself.
Yeah.
See what I mean? So what I often get to is like, okay, if they, for really sophisticated clients, people who've already done a lot of self-improvement work, I think this kind of thing works great because they've already got a lot of tools and they've already got a bunch of belief systems on the conscious level that they can then translate down that would work really well for them, right? I think that is not necessarily the case with people who have not done a lot of deep belief work and have not done a lot of self-improvement work. But even for the people who have, you still have that problem of, are they reinforcing existing negative patterns? Are they just teaching themselves how to do the bad thing better and faster? Right? How to run faster, my friend.
So I'm 100% with you there. So what I'm never doing is I'm never wanting the superconscious to treat it based on the old unhelpful programs, because you're right, then you get in this wonderful but nasty vicious cycle of whether it's further self-sabotage. Absolutely. So if it's I'm not good enough, normally it'll be treating them in a way that allows them to recognize or remember that they were always enough, that they are enough, they will always be enough, which is broad enough to be able to let the AI system get to work over a big enough thing. But it's nuanced enough that it's very difficult to be able to reinforce bad behavior with that overarching thing. So there'll always be a nuance or a cap to the results that I'm asking that thing to get. So if it's so they can perform better.
One question I have is how different is their life after this? Because if I'm looking at it from the perspective of like free will, where it's like, okay, there's a whole bunch of options that are not available because it's like, this is the only path you can walk.
Yes.
Like after the superconscious work, how much broader does that pathway get? And so how bigger is that list of options? You know what I mean?
So it completely depends what they've come for.
Exactly.
Right. So if it's, the idea is to make the things that seemed impossible seem effortless. That's generally the idea that I'm going. So by doing that, I normally help them shift the identity. So as opposed to, right, I'm going to grind because I'm a grinder, I'm a hustler, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And now I'm just going to be able to handle more lactate than before. That's not normally what's... Because you're right. Like, how quickly can we drill you into the ground like a tent peg?
Exactly.
That's not... It's more, how can we find a way for you to be able to do these things and it just feel effortless, a part of who you are, without the feeling that you're having to fight against every inch of the current. That's normally the way that it's done. So I'll ask the superconscious, the AI system, to go in there in a way that allows them to increase their baseline, so that doing all of those things, they can do it without the friction, without the stress.
Correct.
That's normally the way.
And that's the thing that's where I think you and I differ, is that if I have somebody coming in saying, hey, I want to grind better and I want to be more successful in business, I'm going to be like, okay, cool. What's the rest of your life look like? Right? Because you're coming in for this thing of like, I want to be better in business. Great. That's how you're perceiving the problems that you want, and that's the outcome you want. Fair enough. I want to see what the rest of your life is looking like, because that's going to tell me how narrow a path you're on. Because often with entrepreneurs and very highly performing successful people, is they want more success. They want bigger numbers. They want to be able to get bigger numbers faster, better, easier, which makes sense. To me, that's that trap of, you have to prove yourself. Like, why do you need a number bigger?
So this might, I think, just be the slight difference in the clientele that we have. So mine, I've normally branded mine as spiritually curious entrepreneurs. So they're not quite down the rabbit hole where they're sage smudging yet.
Sure.
They love the neuroscience, but there's a part of them that says, hang a second, I'm really successful, but I haven't learned to enjoy it. What the fuck's going on?
There you go. So it could very well be that. Yeah.
So it's the baseline understanding that they've come in at. I'm already helping them expand the foundation, because that's why they came in the first place. So
right. So you're specifically helping them solve the problem, but I don't want to keep trying to do that.
Yes. So it's how can I get balance between the science of the achievement and the art of fulfillment? That's literally why they're there. As opposed to how if they
how
say
do I succeed better, faster.
Yeah. I want to be faster. I want to be tougher. I want to. Okay, then normally it's and I'm sure you and I are both Trojan horses in that respect. They come to us because they think they're getting one thing, and it's like, we'll give you a bit of this, but that's it.
Yeah.
And so what I'd love to know is, what are people coming to you on a surface level for, and then what are they really coming to you for, do you think?
So one of the big things that How to approach this topic. So fundamentally, I think that people who are driven one way or the other, underachievers and overachievers, have exactly the same problem in that they're driven by an overwhelming fear of something. Okay. And essentially that there's something that was an existential threat on a physical or emotional level that they could not find a way to cope with in their early years. Okay. And when we're faced with an existential threat, humans have 5 different survival strategies. Got fight, flight, freeze, right, hide, fawn, try and talk your way out of it, and flop, curl up in a ball, try to protect yourself as best you can, take it, right? Well, if reality is the existential threat, fighting doesn't work. You can run, right? You can change your situation, get in a different situation, get in a different environment. That works. Freeze doesn't work, can't hide from reality. Fawning doesn't work, you can beg as much as you want, it ain't listening. Flop is your only other option. So when the reality itself is that existential threat, you basically come down to 2 responses. You can run or you can take it and curl up in a ball and take it. Your higher achievers are the ones who have been running. They found a way out of that situation. The reason they're high achievers is they can't stop running, right? The underachievers are the ones that couldn't find a way out, so they curled up in a ball and take it, right? So these are the guys that are stuck in a cage where everything's okay, but everything that they really want in life is outside that cage. They can't get to it. The overachievers are the ones that are on that treadmill, they're on the hamster wheel, and they just can't seem to stop running. Yeah. So what you see is one of 2 things: either people that are not able to really get what they need in life, in which case they want to open the door of that cage and get out to it. Perfect. Or guys who are on the treadmill and they're recognizing that they need more in life, or the treadmill's not working anymore. Like they used to be really successful, something happened, and now they're stuck in the cage and they can't get out. Right. So fundamentally, what you're trying to do in that situation is get down to what that existential threat is and remove that existential threat. So it's not necessary to be in the cage. It's not necessary to run anymore.
Yeah. And how is that presenting to them 9 times out of 10 at the surface level?
So at the surface level, what you see is things like relationships not working well.
Okay.
You see situations where like boom and bust cycle in business where you make a lot of progress and then everything explodes. Or you'll see a situation where like one thing is going well, but every rest of your life is a mess, right? Or a situation where they're always jumping from project to project to project to project. They have shiny object syndrome, something massively, right? You see it show up in imposter syndrome quite a bit where it's like, oh, I feel like I should be successful, but I'm not feeling it. You see it show up in a lot of procrastination, a lot of avoidance, that kind of things. So it can show up in all these different ways, but it fundamentally comes down to, are you running or are you stuck in a cage?
Yeah. Do you think that it falls into fighting at any point? I've spoken to a couple of people who they're almost looking for a new enemy because they were used to there always being an enemy when they were growing up.
So what I see, I had the same kind of issue where it was I grew up in a fairly emotionally volatile house. Right. And so up until a certain point, all I could do was take it. But once you start getting your teenage years, you start getting that capacity to fight back. Right. And so I had what I called the beast. And that's the part of me that like come out and was like rip somebody's face off when I need to. Right. Well, the problem is, for me at least, and what I see in a lot of these situations is the beast evolved to protect that wounded child. And while the wounded child exists, beast is there to take care of it. Right. But also, there's definitely a part of me that wants vengeance. And I can't get back to the people who are around. So you'll do. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's almost looking for an excuse to take out that anger and that vengeance that it can't get on the past. It can't do anything about the past, but I can do something about this now. Right. So the way that I was able to move that, to get through that is, working with a couple of hypnotists was, okay, take care of the wounded child. So the wounded child no longer needed protecting. So now that impulse isn't necessary. It's like, okay, but beast still wants to rip some faces off because he wants a vengeance. Okay, well, now you have to teach it that vengeance and revenge doesn't actually work. It's not going to change anything. It's not necessary and it's harmful. And once you do that, it's like, okay, now this is a tool in the toolbox when I need it and when it's appropriate, rather than it's Tuesday. Right. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's why I asked about the idea of there being that fight, just because I've seen plenty of entrepreneurs who there's that hunger And it's like, well, hey, it got me from A to B. It made me a millionaire and it crushed my competitors. But
Yes.
I'm miserable inside and I don't know. Yeah.
Can't turn it off. Yeah. 100%. 100%. And that's, the competitive thing is very much what I call the flight response, because it's I'm going to run from this, but it's also, I have to prove to myself, right? They don't feel good about themselves. They don't like this conclusion. So they're trying to prove it wrong by achieving.
Yes.
The difficulty is, how do you prove a feeling wrong? It doesn't work, right? Ben Shapiro has that great quote, facts don't care about your feelings. Gravity doesn't care how you feel about it. It works anyway, right?
Yeah.
Problem is, feelings don't care about your facts. So you can achieve as much as you want. It's never going to change that fundamental conclusion, that fundamental I'm not good enough down inside. You actually have to do that on that emotional subconscious level. Yeah. Right? Again, different tools analyzing the world. Symbols versus color. Doesn't matter what the world is. If the color's red, that's the right answer. You can change the words as much as you want. It's not going to change the fact that the letters are red. Yeah. Right? So you actually have to change the color of the letters. Then it can mean something different, right?
And so when people sort of get to sign on with you, is there generally a process that you take them through? Is it just a one-off session? How would you normally work with them?
No, I definitely do. I don't do one-off sessions anymore. Because I look at this as very much a set of beliefs and these different foundations and structures, and that you want to shift these foundations and structures. Like, there's no way to know how complicated that problem is going to be going in, or what we're going to have to shift and what we're going to have to do. So it's like, okay, you just pay me a flat fee and we're going to work together until it's done. Whether that's 1 session, 10 sessions, it doesn't really matter, because we don't know how much time that's going to take. Typically, we're able to get about 80 or 90% of the work done the first 2 or 3 sessions, because there's just like, if you go from I'm not good enough to I'm good enough, that changes a lot of things right there. Yeah. I don't deserve to I deserve changes a lot of things right there. And then after that, it's like, okay, go out there in the world, try stuff, see what's still not working for you. Because the proof is really in the pudding. It's, can you move through the world in different ways? Are you reacting to these different situations? Like, you used to be really angry when this would happen. It doesn't bother you anymore. You used to be really afraid of this. Not afraid of this anymore. You can do it easily, right? Yeah. You used to be a very narrow life. Now you're going to the gym, and you're going to the movies, and you're going dancing, and you're going vacations and stuff like that. It used to terrify you to be away from your office for more than 2 hours. Now you turn your phone off after you leave, and you don't turn it back on until the weekend's over, right? Yeah. Things like that, right? Or, oh, I still can't do stuff at the office. Okay, great. Let's dig into that, right? And so I tend to use very task-based, use the RTT, multiple regression stuff for the first 1 or 2 sessions, because you can cover so much ground there. You get so much information on how things are structured down there. And then after that major work is done, it's much more conversation, because you're talking about more nuanced stuff, and these are a little bit more complicated, and you got to sort of follow the threads that way. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to the same regression sort of model that the initial like heavy lifting does.
Yeah, that makes sense. So something that you might be able to help me with, because I've been wondering this over the last couple of months.
Sure.
Where someone will make a shift, and let's say that they've had that beast with them for so long, and then they open their eyes and the beast is gone, or the overthinker, or you name the demon, sure, it's there, and then suddenly it's gone. Mm-hmm. Other than time and new experiences to fill up that cabinet, do you know of any other tools that can help people feel completely comfortable with seeing the world through what seems to be these new eyes?
So I think that one of the differences is that I don't make the beast go away. It's still there.
Okay.
Right? It just only comes out when it's appropriate. The overthinker, that capacity is still there. You just use it when it's appropriate. Yeah. So it's not that it goes away. It becomes a tool that is used less frequently or more deliberately than it was before. Yeah. So what happens often is you see, at least for me and a lot of what I've seen from my clients, is that you're just moving through the world in a much more zen, much more chill way. Yes. And then when the situation is appropriate, then you take those tools out of the cabinet that are appropriate for the situation. Like for me, I go to boxing. So Beast got to come out and play because he needs to exercise, right? And overthinking, it's like I'll start digging in to these kinds of podcasts and have these kinds of discussions, because that part of my brain needs the exercise. It's part of me that can now be used for a much more deliberate, much more constructive purpose. It's not about it going away. It's about repurposing it and leveraging it more appropriately and more effectively. And that I find is a very natural sort of process that people sort of like fall into. You do have to learn how to navigate the world in a new way, but it's often more like, oh, I'm surprised because I should have been angry at that and I'm not.
Yes.
Right?
So that there
actions don't happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So for a lot of people, though, there's still that element of that beast was with me 16 hours a day. Like every waking moment, it was there. So even it only being there 3 times a week, if I'm doing some sort of sport or boxing or something like that, that still can feel like quite the jump. Is it that you are then actively saying, hey, let's make sure that the beast still has its time? Is it that you're actively scheduling that time for the beast to still exist? Or are your clients feeling completely okay with it? Because I find a lot of my clients, when the overthinker just isn't there when they wake up in the morning, for at least the first couple of weeks, that feels wonderful but alien.
Yeah, but what's the problem with that? It should feel alien. Right? So part of it is like, yes, it is going to feel alien for a while because it's supposed to, because it's unfamiliar. That's how unfamiliar things feel. But I think that's what's happening. The difference is, depending upon how you do the change work, if you're not addressing the purpose and the drive and the foundation of why that thing was doing what it was doing, there can be a sense that there's now this void that is now unfulfilled. Like, I used to have this tool to take care of this problem. Now I don't have this tool anymore. How do I solve this problem? And that, I think, is where a lot of the distress comes in, right? So if the overthinking was the tool that they were using to solve the anxiety and the danger of the future, and you take away the overthinking, but they still have the anxiety and the danger of the future that they need to deal with, or they feel they still need to deal with, then there is now this void that causes, that's where the panic and the anxiety comes in of like, oh shoot, like now I don't have a tool to address this need.
Yes.
Right. So you got to identify the need, take care of that in a way that doesn't necessitate this tool. Yeah. So it's not about taking the tool away. It's about making this process here unnecessary.
Yes. Okay. That makes sense. So, because they were having that, they're having the sense of, oh, like it's unfamiliar.
And as long as there's not a problem that they can't solve, then it's fine. Right. But if there's problems they need to solve and they don't have the tool to solve it, that's when the panic, that's when the distress comes in, because they don't have a tool for that purpose anymore.
So that's it. So what I haven't been doing, because it's never been a problem. The only thing was, hey, this feels unfamiliar. And in my mind, selfishly, I'm thinking, how can we make this feel familiar quicker? That's where I'm normally going. But that there, what you just said is just golden, reminding them that, hey, you've still got a tool available to be able to deal with this should a problem arise. That's something that I'm not saying, that I think could be a really important reminder for myself, clients and people listening to this, that, hey, just because the fear's gone away doesn't mean your ability to work with problems, deal with this, it's gone.
Yeah, exactly. So again, that's why I am so big on integration. It is never about getting rid of, letting go, moving on. That's never what I do. Because if you let go of something, where does it go? It's like, let go of my past. Really? Your past is like still there, bro. Like, you can try and let go of it as much as you want. It's not going to change anything, right? So for me, it's about saying, okay, here's this beast. Beast is part of you. It's not going away. It's not going to go away even if you try and make it go away. So how do we integrate that in a way that works with the rest of you? How do we get it on board with the plan? How do we make it part of the team? Right now, it's gone rogue, right? It's doing stuff that's causing problems for the team. It's like, how do we make it a team player? As soon as it's a team player, you don't have any problems because everybody's on the same team, moving in the same direction, which is why I don't see that same level of friction and distress, because everybody's on the same team, moving in the same direction. It's there if it's needed. If it's not needed, it's just chilling, waiting for something for time to do. Now, for me, I like being in that state. I was in the Marine Corps. Did martial arts. I've done boxing and stuff like that. I like being able to be in that state where you're like, it's fun for me. So I make time for that. If that's not something you like, don't do it. I don't like arguing with people. I really don't. So I don't get in arguments. But if I get in an argument, I'm perfectly fine going World War III. Like, Hulk smash diplomacy is kind of a specialty of mine, So, so if I have to, I don't mind going there. I'm perfectly comfortable going there. It's just, I'd rather not.
Okay. Well, so that's really, really helpful. Let's take a slight left turn and let's go into the wonderful world of relationships, because I know that's something that clearly you're doing a lot of work with. I love this topic. And I'm thinking of all the men who are listening to this at the moment, what do you think are some of the key things they need to know about relationships?
Ooh, okay. So I think that number one, and this is something that I kind of came to recently, which I absolutely love. There's this idea that, as a man, the women in your life are judging value. Like, they're judging you and your value and who you are and what you can provide and so forth and so on. So you have to like show up and show them how awesome you are and prove to them that you have all this to offer, right? Here's the thing. The only way somebody can judge you is if they have authority over you. If they don't have authority over you, all they have is an opinion, right? So if you're allowing women to judge you and your value, you're basically making them an authority over you. You're giving them power and authority over you. Whereas if you say, I'm trying to figure out how we can relate, now there's no judgment. So even if they don't like you, even if you don't measure up for them, that's not judgment. You don't have to take that personally. That's just their opinion. Everybody's got them. Most of them stink, right? The other thing I would say is a lot of times men are using women in their life and the women they're chasing as a measure of, again, it's a measure of their value, but not necessarily as how do I measure up, but as an indicator of, okay, in order to get like a 10, I got to be a 10. But if all I'm able to get is a 6, then I can't be more than a 6, right? So I got to go chase the 10s, because if I can get a 10, then that proves that I'm awesome, right? So it's almost like they're using the quality or the attractiveness of the woman as a scoreboard, which means they're treating this whole thing like a video game. So they'll wonder you're in a situation, you're treating it like there's winners and losers in a competition, because you're using women as a way to prove to yourself your value. And just like an entrepreneur trying to run up, the scoreboard as far as the income and the revenue of their business, you're trying to run up the scoreboard by getting more attractive women and so forth and so on. And just like that doesn't work because you can't prove they're feeling wrong, this won't work because you can't prove they're feeling wrong. Which is why you see people who are heavily into the pickup artist space and so forth and so on are miserable. Even as they're dating all these really attractive women, and those relationships tend to be very, very poor because they don't never taken care of that core self-worth issues that they've got, right? So what I would say is approach relationships like a dance. It's a dance, and it's an act of co-creation. Okay? So it's not about, I need to get this woman to be my girlfriend because it can prove something. It's like, here's an interesting person. How well can we dance together? What can we create together, right? Because any dance, even if there's a leader and a follower, it's still an invitation. It's a give and take. As a leader, I'm not just like driving this woman around the floor, dance floor. That's not how that works, right? I can't just like, you're going to do this and this and this and this. That's not how that works. Every lead is a suggestion. And she's taking that suggestion and responding, right? And together, there's a communication and a flow. And together, you create this dance, and it looks amazing. And the first dance, I used to do Argentine tango, and there's this idea of the 3 dances. And the first dance is just like, you're trying to establish the language, right? Can I lead? Can you follow? What do I need to do so that you can pick up on this, right? The second dance, you're like, okay, now that we can communicate, what are the limits? How good are you? How good am I? How big is the box that we get to play in? And the third dance is when you finally get to actually start dancing. Because now you know how big the box is, and now you're free to flow within that. So if I'm meeting women, going out there in the dating world, going to a singles and stuff and so on, I'm not trying to figure out how to get this woman to like me. I'm trying to figure out, who is she? What does she have to offer? Can we communicate? Are we having fun when we're talking? Is she flirty? Is she not so flirty? Is she reserved? Is she standoffish? Is she really engaged? Is she like bored? Right? Can we communicate? Can we even have a conversation? Great. We can have a conversation. Wonderful. What sort of things do we have in common? What kind of things do we like? Right? Is there shared values or shared interests? Shared lifestyle. Like, I grew up in Kansas. I'm a very simple guy. Is she decked out in Chanel and Louis Vuitton? Like, that's not going to be matched. Like, that's just not going to work, right? So instead of trying to force something, I'm just looking for interesting dance partners.
Yeah.
Because that's going to let me create something much more beautiful, much more compelling, and much more interesting than trying to use someone as a scoreboard or trying to use someone as a judge of my own value.
Yeah. And at what point did you start going through this yourself? Because you said towards the beginning of this conversation, great, I'm going back into the dating scene. Were we going in with that scoreboard mentality, or was it through navigating that you went,
so
I need to start learning how to dance?
It was, that's a good question. So I don't think I ever had the scoreboard mentality. I never really saw that as a measure of my value. That wasn't the problem I had, but it definitely was an issue trying to find compatible partners. And that's always been an issue for me. I didn't get diagnosed with Asperger's until a few months ago. So that's something new to know, right? And so I just didn't understand how to find people that were compatible in that way. What I think it really was is, as I got into the self-development stuff, like between 2019 and the end of 2022, like, I went on a self-development, self-improvement rampage. I went on a jihad. Like, I am tired of this stuff. I'm tired of having these problems. I am done. Time to go to war. So I went through pretty much every modality you can think of. I did coaching, I did therapy, I did hypnosis, obviously. I did spiritual retreats, I did psychedelics, I did pretty much everything. I did energy healing in the whole 9 yards. So if you want to get into the woo, I can talk about the woo. No problem at all. That stuff, like, there is something to that you can actually feel when you start opening up and like actually getting into that. Like, there's some really powerful stuff that you can do with that. And so as I'm doing all this work and as I'm doing all this changing, what I wanted from relationships shifted. Instead of just being like more about the fun and the enjoyment and the sensuality, it became, okay, I need deeper connection, right? It became less about the hedonism. It became less about, going to the crazy parties and stuff like that, and more about finding someone that I could go really, really deep with, but that's something that I've only really come to over the past year, and I had my last relationship ended back in April. It's been a rough summer. Finding out I have Asperger's and trying to come to terms with that and figuring out what that means for me in a dating perspective. I also found out that I have bipolar disorder. That was also a surprise. Trying to come to terms with that and getting that all taken care of. It's a lot of stuff. So I haven't really gotten to a point where I can start dating seriously. So I've been single for about 8 months now. Done some dating here and there. None of those things really worked out well. It's like, okay, let me go ahead and take a step back from that, get myself solid first. Once I'm solid in myself and centered in myself and know exactly what I need and what I want, then I'll go find it.
Yeah.
Right. But the nice thing is, being solid and centered in myself and having done so much work, I'm okay with not being with somebody right now. I'm alone, but I'm not lonely.
Yeah.
Right. And so many people, for me, especially, oh my Lord, I didn't spend more than a couple months single for 20 something years. I'd be relationship to relationship to relationship to relationship. I couldn't stay alone. And the summer was really hard. Like, I was freaking out there for a while, not able to find somebody until I could get solid again. So I think the other thing is making sure you're going into this relationship journey with the right mindset, right? If you're coming into it needy, if you're coming into it not whole in yourself, broken, I guess, if you haven't done the work to dig in and figure out how you actually work and why you work the way you are, and get yourself to a point where you're working the way you want to be working. Like, it's going to be very, very difficult to find a healthy romantic relationship that's actually going to give you what you want and need.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that's some serious labels to be given in a couple of months as well.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, and my life makes a heck of a lot more sense now that I have those labels to put on it. It's like, oh, I understand.
Oh God, get it? Yeah.
I get it. Okay, now, all right, fair enough.
That's it. To be fair, the amount of people who have said that I've probably got some level of Asperger's or ADHD or something like that, I've just thought, well, those labels for me, I don't know how helpful they'd be, because I wouldn't really know. A little bit like yourself, it's like I don't know where to put that information in my head. I don't know where and what I would personally do with that. And what do you think about soulmates? Is it bullshit? Do you think it could be a thing? What are your thoughts?
So there's a gentleman by the name of Matt Kahn, Kahn, and he's got this speech he does. He's one of these spiritual guru types. Talks to angels and whole nine yards. Hilarious guy, absolutely hilarious. He's got this one video up on YouTube called "Soulmates, Soul Contracts, and Twin Flames," and I really like his explanation. And essentially, it's this idea that you're coming into this world and you have a plan of how this life is going to go out. And so you're bringing different people in the world into your life to learn different things, right? So twin flames are there to teach you lessons. And the quicker you learn the lessons, the less painful it is. But if you don't learn a lesson, the intensity just increases. So you learn your lesson, right? But once you've learned enough lessons and once you're kind of solid in yourself, like that's when at the point at which you can stop bringing people into your life to learn lessons and start bringing people into your life to really be a partner and go on that journey together. And that, I think, is where that whole soulmate concept is someone who is with you in your life to create something beautiful together. It's this idea of like divine union, the masculine and the feminine come together and to become one, right? Where I think this is sort of like where we've kind of like lost the thread on marriage and in society these days is it's supposed to be death to do us part on purpose, right? You can look at, the one way that I kind of look at life is like, my goal in life is to live forever or die trying. Either way I win, right? Yeah. And the way I look at marriage and partnership and soulmates is this idea that you get together with somebody and you say, okay, we are going to live together or we are going to die trying, right? And that intentional creation of a relationship, that intentional creation of some sort of union together deliberately, with eyes open, coming into it solid, bringing all of your wounds and all of your strengths and everything else to it and accepting each other fully, knowing that there's going to be problems, knowing that there's challenges to navigate, but knowing that life is easier to navigate when you got somebody there to navigate with you. Because they're going to bring things to the table that you don't have. Right? They're going to see the world in very different ways. They're going to have different talents, different strengths, different abilities. So leverage that. Right? And so finding somebody that you match with, that you've got shared values, that you've got a shared vision, that you've got a shared lifestyle with. And then saying, okay, what can create? What can create? How can we dance? How beautiful can we make this thing? Like that to me is what soulmate energy is all about. And whether or not there's like one person out there or a million people out there, like, I don't know. I think it's much more just being willing to do that and commit that deeply and finding somebody else who is willing to do that and commit that deeply as well.
Yeah. And if values, lifestyle after 20 years, if those things change, what happens there?
Well, I think that values are those things that are unchanging, right? Those very core, like family and hedonism. And like, there's a book by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Sean T. Smith. He's a relationship and marriage therapist in Denver. It's called The Tactical Guide to Women. And he's got there's 11 sort of like universal big values of family and conformity and like novelty and stuff like this, inquisitiveness and individuality and openness, right? Those things don't really change much. Probably got 2-3 big ones that are like really, really important to you. And those have probably been consistent throughout your life. Now they're going to express themselves differently at different stages of your life. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. But if you're aligned or compatible on those big values, and that's been consistent for you throughout your life and consistent for her throughout your life, then odds are you're going to be able to find a way to navigate any different ways that's manifesting at different stages of life, right? You talk about lifestyle. Okay. Part of lifestyle is like, okay, how status oriented are you? Right? Do you care about the brands? I don't care about the brands. Do you care about the brands? Well, if I don't care about the brands and you do, then maybe we do that. But if that becomes problematic, maybe we need to renegotiate. right? And as long as they're willing to meet the individual's needs, recognize each other's needs, and come to some sort of compromise, some way where you both can get what you need, not necessarily what you want, but what you need, right? And I think is a big key point. What you need and what you want are often different. What you want is generally what you think is going to give you what you need, what it might give, right? So if you're focusing on needs rather than wants, generally it's pretty easy to find a reasonable compromise where everybody gets what they need, right? Maybe not what you want, but what you need, right? I think as long as you're focusing on those needs, and if you've done the work to make sure you're actually aligned in those values, then everything else is probably going to be something you can probably figure out.
Yeah. Oh, that seems like a wonderful note to end on, Ryan. Where could people find you, including all those wonderful single women out there? Because I think you're probably going to get a couple of inquiries after this.
I certainly hope so. Certainly hope so. So my Instagram is Ryan W. Christensen. My website is www.hypnosisformen.com. You can find me on YouTube as well, hypnosisformen.com, on there as well. A lot of this stuff is a bit older. So I'm getting ready to do a big content push coming up next year. I'm hoping to get a lot more stuff like the philosophies and everything we talked about today are something that I haven't really expressed before publicly in my content. So I'm looking to do a lot more of that. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
I do. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on. This has been such a blast. I really, really enjoyed it. All of it.
Scott, it was amazing. Thank you so much for inviting me.